Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a pretty fascinating stack of source material. It's all focused on the career of, well, one of the most compelling actors out there right now, the Brazilian star Wagner Moura.
Yeah, and our sources, they're mainly drawing from this concentrated analysis series. It basically treats his entire filmography as one coherent statement. Arguing his work fundamentally challenges our whole concept of heroism. So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to get a quick insight into how Moura uses his acting, not just for entertainment, right, but as this really crucial way to analyze society, politics, history, especially in Brazil. We're trying to figure out why his roles make us confront these really uncomfortable truths about power.
Right. And what's really interesting here, I think, is understanding just how intentional Moura is about this. The analysis suggests he's much more than just an actor. He's framed as a kind of living archive.
A living archive. That's a strong term. It is. A living archive of Brazil's really complex, often painful social and political history. He seems to deliberately pick roles that dive right into the darkest corners, the morally murky areas where state power grinds against corruption or where resistance movements clash with brutal state repression.
That paints a picture. So the core idea we're pulling out is that in Moura's view, or at least through his work, true insight doesn't come from some neat victory.
No, not at all.
It comes from the courage needed to expose the flaws, the cracks inside the systems we depend on. His characters matter because they go through intense pain, conflict, uncertainty. Sometimes they just flat out lose.
Exactly. And to really grasp his impact, we need to look at this specific analytical approach. It views his whole filmography, from the really violent cop thrillers to the quieter diplomatic dramas, as this set of interconnected texts.
Okay.
He's seen as this cultural figure, whose choices reflect these deep, often unresolved issues in Brazil's collective mind. Things like the legacy of authoritarian violence or massive social inequality. Wounds that haven't healed.
And his preparation method sounds, well, intense doesn't quite cover it. It's described as less like acting prep and more like an investigation. Like a determined investigative journalist almost, diving into historical archives, doing extensive interviews with real people involved in these events, really immersing himself in the whole socio-political context. He's not just learning lines, he's learning the history that created the character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this approach, it creates a very clear pattern in his career. Moura seems to consistently pick roles that work as sharp social commentary over just guaranteed commercial hits.
Right, he's tackling the big stuff.
The big, messy stuff. Police militarization, the shadow of dictatorship, governmental failures. He sees his job, it seems, as a platform for engaging with history, for challenging collective memory. He definitely doesn't want to give the audience easy answers or moral comfort. He wants you thinking, maybe even arguing, long after you finished watching.
He's drawn to stories that just refuse to be simple. So, okay. If we're going to track this complexity, we really have to start where those lines between, say, authority, heroism, and villainy just completely break down, where it all gets very gray and very violent. Which brings us, inevitably, to Captain Roberto Nascimento, the Tropa de Elite films.
Yeah.
This character feels like the absolute benchmark, the moment where Moura just systematically dismantles the whole action hero trope. Nascimento commands BOPE, the elite police squad in Rio's favelas. He operates entirely in this moral gray zone.
And the paradox there is really the tragic heart of the analysis, isn't it? Nascimento is incredibly dedicated, ruthlessly efficient, and seems genuinely committed to stopping the horrific drug violence.
But
his methods.
Yeah, the methods.
Torture, extrajudicial killings, intense psychological warfare. They end up mirroring the brutality of the very criminals he's hunting. The system he's in, it's portrayed as fundamentally broken, forcing these morally catastrophic choices. Yeah. And that's precisely how the films just obliterate that clean line between hero and monster.
And the analysis really stresses that the films don't apologize for this. There's no attempt to soften it.
No.
We're forced to see how, in these urban conflicts, police brutality isn't some rare exception. It becomes a normalized, everyday strategy. And the systemic corruption, it's not a subplot. It seeps into every level of law enforcement. It turns these urban areas into permanent war zones, basically, with ordinary people trapped right in the middle.
And it's so important that Moura makes us feel the cost. The psychological toll, the physical breakdown. We don't just see the efficient killer, we see the man crumbling under the weight of it all.
Right, across both films.
Exactly. You track his growing paranoia, his escalating aggression, his physical weariness. The quote-unquote heroism, if you can even call it that, isn't his actions' effectiveness. It's more about him being this vessel, this human case study, showing the sheer burden of making impossible choices. It reveals how authority figures might rationalize extreme violence to themselves in the name of order.
But doesn't that risk, with such a charismatic actor playing him, doesn't it risk kind of glorifying that violence, even unintentionally, just because he makes Nascimento so compelling?
That's a really key tension the films play with, and it's why the analysis focuses so much on that psychological cost, the internal destruction. The films don't present his actions as good or desirable, but maybe as inevitable, or at least inevitable within that specific corrupted system.
Okay, I see.
It holds Nascimento accountable by showing him breaking down. You're meant to be repulsed by the methods, definitely, but also to understand the environment that foster them. It's aiming for complex critique, not simple glorification. It's uncomfortable.
That makes sense. It's definitely uncomfortable viewing. Okay, so let's shift the lens quite dramatically now. If Tropa de Elite showed us violence by the state, what about violence against the state? Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk about Moura's directorial debut, Marighella, from 2019. This one explores Carlos Marighella, a revolutionary figure who fought against Brazil's military dictatorship back in the 60s.
Yes, this is a really crucial move for Moura. It confirms that commitment to confronting history head-on. Marighella is absolutely a deliberate act of historical reckoning. Marighella himself, he was a communist guerrilla fighter, became a major figure opposing the military regime. And his decision to embrace armed struggle is, well, still highly controversial in Brazil today.
And what's fascinating, according to the sources, is that the film holds on to Moura's dedication to that moral reflection, that complexity, even though he's now portraying a revolutionary figure, not a compromised cop. Marighella isn't presented as some flawless icon.
Not at all.
He's shown as deeply human, navigating these impossible ethical choices under extreme life-or-death political pressure.
Exactly. And the film's real strength, the analysis argues, is how it refuses to sanitize the violence that's often inherent in revolutionary struggle. It shows the raw, often tragic reality of someone who chose armed resistance only after all peaceful democratic options were completely crushed by the dictatorship. The heroism here is about sacrifice, but it comes at a cost of blood and profound uncertainty.
So the heroism depicted is tangled up with this historical trauma, stuff that's still really unresolved in Brazil's collective memory about the dictatorship years. Mm-hmm. The film forces this necessary confrontation, doesn't it, about when or even if violence becomes justified and what the long-term costs are when you pursue freedom against these incredibly oppressive systems.
You see this theme pop up elsewhere, too, this idea of being trapped psychologically during the dictatorship.
Yeah.
There's an analysis of his spy thriller, O Agente Secreto, The Secret Agent, set in 1977.
Right.
And the whole spy genre setup isn't really for thrills. It's used to expose the intense paranoia of the surveillance state. The main character gets caught inside the state's violence machine, psychologically imprisoned. It just reinforces Moura's interest in how systems trap individuals, no matter which side they're supposedly on.
Okay, so we've seen the enforcer of state violence, the rebel against it. Now let's bring in a third, very different angle on heroism with Sergio from 2020. Here, Moura plays the UN diplomat Sergio Vieira de Mello, who tragically died in the 2003 Baghdad bombing. And the whole tone shifts. The explosive intensity is gone, replaced by this remarkable vulnerability, this quiet emotional restraint.
Yeah, this performance does something really unique. It completely strips away the usual myth-making around humanitarian work. It lays bare the deep moral fatigue, the quiet moments of doubt that Sergio experienced. This is a man who saw decades of global failures, immense suffering.
So the heroism is different here.
It is. It's not about fighting or leading a revolution. It's defined more as dogged persistence, just keeping going despite overwhelming limitations, despite accumulated trauma. It's about maintaining that professional composure while looking systemic global failure right in the eye.
It's like the heroism of sheer emotional exhaustion. He's trying to patch things up while everything's falling apart. Okay, so looking across this whole arc then, the tortured cop, the driven revolutionary, the weary diplomat, what are the connecting threads? What patterns emerge when we synthesize this?
Well, based on the analysis, we can boil it down to three core themes that seem to define the roles Moura chooses. And they all circle back to that idea of anti-heroic insight. First, there's authority as performance. His characters, whether they're in a BOPE uniform or a UN suit, they have to project this image of strength, of control. But underneath, internally, they're often experiencing moral collapse or grappling with the emptiness of the system they serve. The public face of power is a mask hiding personal devastation.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second?
The second is justice's ambiguity. His films consistently highlight the absence of clear moral wins, especially in systems that seem designed to just perpetuate violence. Marighell's actions, for instance, aren't shown as glorious triumphs, but maybe as necessary evils in a desperate situation. There's no clean victory, just survival and the heavy weight of consequences.
Right, no easy outs. And the third?
And the third is memory as accountability. Whether it's about contemporary police brutality or the dark history of the dictatorship, Moore's work really emphasizes that historical actions have lasting weight. They can't just be swept under the rug or forgotten. His roles challenge the audience. They challenge you to think about who really holds power, what the human cost is, and whether genuine redemption is even possible within structures that are fundamentally flawed or corrupted.
That feels like a really vital connection. So ultimately, Wagner Moore is using film to probe these huge societal problems, right? Through characters who embody these deep, often painful contradictions. His work never seems to offer a simple answer. It forces the audience to sit with uncertainty, often uncomfortably, and to accept that the figures we might label heroes are often deeply complicatedly human, flawed.
Exactly. The ultimate finding, really, is that Moore shows us that truly meaningful storytelling requires real bravery. The courage to portray heroes not as shiny icons, but as complex, vulnerable, and yes, deeply flawed human beings. His performances make us think critically about power's corrupting potential, the sacrifices involved in resistance, and how humanity somehow persists even within these broken systems.
So, if Moore consistently shows us that the line between the saviors and the monsters within these systems is so incredibly thin, maybe even blurred, well, what kinds of moral compromises are happening right now by figures of authority in your own society? Compromises that maybe we're all choosing to rationalize, perhaps in the name of stability or order. That's definitely something worth exploring long after this deep dive ends.